Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Howard Zemsky, head of ESD. In just a few moments, I'll formally introduce the governor. Let me start with some acknowledgments. First, New York State Assembly Majority Leader. He's a leader's leader. He's a leader's leader, Joe Morelli. Senator Pam Helming. Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul. New York State DEC Commissioner Basil Sagos. New York State Dishes Acting Commissioner Roger Perino. Brigadier General Raymond Shields. Monroe County Executive Cheryl D'Onofrio. Monroe County Clerk Adam Bello. Monroe County Legislature Minority Leader Cindy Cayley. Wayne County Board of Supervisors Chairman Steve Leroy. Irondequoit Town Supervisor Dave Seeley. Dude, Seeley is in the house. Greece Supervisor Bill Rylick. Webster Supervisor Ron Nesbitt. Parma Supervisor James Smith. Sodas Point Mayor Chris Turtneck. And all other county legislators and elected guests, thank you for joining us today. With the water levels at their highest in 100 years, it has been a battle to hold on to houses that are hanging by a thread, to keep lakeshore businesses open, and to keep flooded roads passable. Despite the efforts of sandbags, pumps, built-up break walls, nature still took a dramatic toll. And experts say it will likely be months before the lake waters drop appreciably. Watching the news clips of battered buildings and flooded neighborhoods is easy to see why shoreline residents and business owners are frustrated, are scared, are exhausted as they work to save their homes and businesses. With the damage done, many are relying on our help to rebuild and to recover. Governor Cuomo has personally toured many of the areas affected by the rising lake levels. He quickly declared a state of emergency, deployed members of the National Guard to assist residents, and delivered over 1 million sandbags to the area, as well as equipment from across the state of New York, including pumps, generators, boats, and light towers. That's okay, you can clap. Multiple state agencies have also been called upon to enforce a no-wake zone along the Lake Ontario and St. Lawrence shoreline to minimize the damage recreational boating can cause to the already jeopardized water's edge. ESD, too, is ready and willing to be of assistance, and I assure you we will help affected communities, and many of our representatives are here today. The governor has been at the helm, managing the flood crisis every step of the way. Please join me in thanking Governor Cuomo for his leadership, and also for thanking the hundreds and thousands of men and women who've worked tirelessly throughout this crisis. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Governor Cuomo, who will provide an update on the emergency circumstance. Oh, sorry. Backing it up. It is now my pleasure to introduce New York State Senator Pamela Helming.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
That's better. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce my colleagues from the Senate. Senator Rich Funke and Senator Joe Robach. Thank you. Commissioner, thank you for that intro. It's my pleasure to be here with all of you to witness the signing of this very important flood relief bill. I'd like to thank Governor Cuomo, Assemblyman Morelli, as well as all of my colleagues in the Senate for their partnership and support for this legislation. So often, Albany is criticized for being politically divided and out of touch with the needs of the real people and small businesses. Today is a great example of how we set aside politics for the benefit of our constituents. By working together to pass this legislation, I believe the Senate, the Assembly, and the Governor are sending a strong message that we are here to help you with both short-term needs and long-term measures to mitigate the impacts of potential future flooding. This, my friends, is how government is supposed to work. The establishment of the $45 million Flood Relief and Recovery Grant Program is a result of a team effort designed to provide much-needed support to our impacted homeowners, businesses, and farms. In addition to the flood relief bill, I know there are several representatives from Monroe County, so I just wanted to mention a separate bill will provide access to grant funding for those municipalities in Monroe County who have been impacted by the severe windstorms this past March. But to everyone here, I just want to say, I understand it's been a long, long 4 months, and I've witnessed firsthand how exhausting and difficult it has been for everyone affected by this flooding. But our community's resilience and courage throughout this whole process is to be commended. Every time I visit communities along the lakeshore, I witness neighbors helping neighbors. And I'm so proud of all of the efforts of everyone in our community who have stepped up to meet this challenge head on. I'd like to offer a special thank you to our local elected officials, our volunteer fire departments, and the National Guardsmen for their hard work and tireless dedication. Thank you. I also want you to know that we will continue to be here for you. We realize that this is just the start of the recovery process, and that with every rain shower and every windstorm that happens, there's more risk for additional flooding. So again, I want to thank you, everyone. Thank you, Governor Cuomo, for your leadership and your support, and we will be here when you need us. Thank you. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Assembly Leader Joe Morelli. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, first of all, to Pam Helming. This is her first year in the state Senate, and she's had some significant challenges in her community, and she has risen to the challenge. It's been great working with you. Her dedication, she's dogged, and she's been a great partner. Please give Pam Helming a big round of applause. And of course, Governor, thank you for being here as you often are. Both in times of challenge and other times when we're working on issues. You're often in the Rochester region, and we're always delighted to have you. And we're also delighted when you bring Commissioner Zemsky with us for a little comic relief. It's always great to have him on the stage as well. And Howard, thanks for all the great work that you do. I do want to pick up on something that Pam said, which is this was really a team effort. And the members of the state legislature on both sides of the aisle and both houses worked tirelessly to make this happen, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank my partners in the Assembly, starting with Pete Lawrence, Mark Johns, and Stephen Hawley. Guys, stand up. As Pam has recounted, the record water levels have caused historic flooding that's devastating communities throughout the lakeshore and places like here in Somerville. Our state and community has always come together in times of need to help one another. When people face disasters, New Yorkers come together like no one else to lend a hand to one another. And likewise, those of us in state government have always stood together during times of crisis without regard to politics or regionalism. The comprehensive package, which the governor will be signing, continues that long tradition by providing critical relief for homeowners, businesses, local governments, so they can begin to rebuild and recover. As Pam mentioned, I'm also pleased this legislation includes funding to aid Monroe County and those towns impacted by the severe windstorm this past spring, including right here in Irondequoit, where there was significant damage. The safety and well-being of our residents is paramount. We will continue to do everything in our power to work with both state and local officials to make resources available and help residents get back on their feet. I have often described Andrew Cuomo as being a force of nature, which, by the way, Governor, is a compliment, just to make sure you understand that. He will move mountains, and in times of crisis, when people face disaster, you would want nobody else in your corner than Andrew Cuomo. He will move mountains when it comes to assisting New Yorkers in crisis, and he's done that over the last several months, repeatedly coming to our region and to our community to provide support and to offer solace to those who are affected by the flooding. So it's with a great deal of pride that I introduce a man who remains a champion for upstate New York, who has worked tirelessly the past months to respond to this crisis situation, and someone I'm proud to call my friend. Please join me in welcoming the great governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to be here today, and thank you all very much for taking the time to come out. It's a pleasure to be with my colleagues from the Assembly and from the Senate, and I want to thank them for a great piece of work that I'm going to sign in just a few moments. To Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, it's a pleasure to be with her. Commissioner Howard Zemsky, who is not just light on his feet, handsome, debonair, and charming. He's also one heck of an economic development director. So let's give him a round of applause. He's going to be running this program. Joe Morelli, see, all those times you called me a force of nature, I thought that was an attack, Joe. I thought that was an insult. But he is the leader of the majority in the Assembly. Grand Mystic Leader is what we normally call him, and because he makes us call him that. Otherwise, he won't pass any legislation. Give him a round of applause for his great work. And Senator Helming, Joe Morelli and Pam Helming were what they call the sponsors of the bill, which means they did the lion's share of the work in negotiating and doing the research and getting their colleagues to sign on. This was a complicated piece of legislation, and it was difficult, and they both did an outstanding job. And Senator Pam Helming has not been in the Senate all that long, so for her to come into the Senate and do this great a job is really extraordinary. So I want to recognize Joe Morelli and Pam Helming. Let's give them a round of applause. To the county executive and all the local elected officials. Today is a beautiful day as we look out at Lake Ontario, and it's a peaceful setting, and it almost belies the danger and the damage that this beautiful body of water has done. As Howard said, it's a 100-year high. There's no doubt that the fundamental reason the water's high is because of extreme rain, and there's been more rain during this part of the season than past records. I believe that's the cause. I believe it's been compounded and complicated by regulatory actions that were not taken at appropriate times. But we are where we are. The state can't do anything about that, but the state can be responsive to the situation. Step one is respond to the emergency. And the state has had more experience than I wish we had in responding to emergencies. There is something about the extreme weather that is now the reality. Somewhere along the way, Mother Nature was offended by someone, but She has been acting out in a way that we haven't seen in history. Just on the numbers, my father was governor of the state of New York, God rest his soul, for 12 years. In about half the time my father was governor, I've had about double the number of natural emergencies. So there is something to the extreme weather. And the legislature has been very good in recognizing it and making the state's emergency response more sophisticated than ever before. We have equipment that we didn't have before, training that we didn't have before. So step one is the emergency response. What you see behind you is the black tubular material of something called an aqua dam. It's basically a portable dam that the state purchased just for Lake Ontario. And you put it in place and you fill it up, and it adds 3, 4, 5 feet of seawall to a property. And it's one of the pieces of equipment we've been deploying to stop the record high level of the lake. You also see sandbags, over 1 million sandbags. There is nothing fancy about a sandbag. It is sand and it is a bag, and you put the sand in the bag and then you carry it, and you do it 1 million times. That is a tremendous, tremendous effort. And I want to thank the National Guard, who's the main workforce for the state, because they did it and they really worked themselves day and night, good weather, bad weather. Let's give them a round of applause and thank them. I also want to thank the local first responders. This is unlike any emergency we've had before in some ways because of its duration. Normally you have an emergency, it's 2 days, it's 3 days, it's 4 days. You have your adrenaline running and you push through and you get it done. This is weeks and weeks and weeks. And I can't tell you, but I see the same people out there, the same firefighters, the same police officers day after day after day. And the stamina that it takes to do what they do. I see Bill Relic here, who I've been with a number of times, and phone call after phone call, and the water just keeps coming, and you feel like you're shoveling against the tide, which you are literally. But they come out every day and they do it. So let's give a round of applause to the local first responders. So step one, the emergency response, we've done. We are prepared for anything that could happen going forward. We have equipment in place, boats in place, personnel in place, state police in place. That moves to step two, which is how do you start to rebuild? In this situation, I believe the federal government owes the state of New York funding to reimburse us for the cost of this disaster. There's a federal relief program run by an agency called FEMA. And FEMA's job is, when you have a disaster like this that rises to a certain economic threshold, they reimburse the recipients for the damage. And we're going to be sending a letter to FEMA saying we intend to apply for FEMA funding. I believe we're going to hit those thresholds. I believe it's only right that the federal government comes to the table and antes up and helps us pay for this disaster. So we'll be doing that with FEMA forthwith. Third, I call on the president to evaluate and appoint qualified people to the IJC. The IJC is the regulatory body. It is the regulatory body that regulates how much water is the outflow of the lakes. There's no doubt that God put the water there, right? Everybody agrees with that. Extraordinary amount of rain, that filled the lake. The second question was, what do the regulators do and how did they react as they saw the water level rising? And I think at a minimum, their actions should be studied with the advantage of hindsight, because My guess is something like this happens again, and we don't want to have the same mistakes made again. The president appoints 3 people to the IJC. I'd love one to be a New Yorker, but certainly they should know the Great Lakes. They should know the environmental issues they're dealing with. So when they make these judgments, they make these judgments in the most informed way. Fourth, you see that boat that's cruising out there with those very friendly-looking people? Wave to them. I don't think they wave, actually. Will they wave? Hello. Yeah. See how friendly? The state police are a friendly force. They are a reminder that we have a new regulation in place that says there is a 5-mile-per-hour speed limit within 600 miles of the shoreline. I know it's an inconvenience for a boater. I'm a boater. The last thing a boater likes to see is that 5-mile-per-hour sign. Please, if you understood the damage that you can be doing with the wake from the boat, you have situations where every wave comes into somebody's basement, every wave comes into somebody's first floor. So literally every wave can do damage, and the last thing we want to do is exacerbate the situation. So it's a 600-foot, 5-mile-per-hour for the full length of the lake, period. And that's enforced by the state police and by the local police. And then the legislation that I will sign now in front of you, which was sponsored by Joe Morelli and Pam Helming, which is a great piece of legislation. And the reason I was teasing Pam and Joe a little bit, I called something called an extraordinary session last week. What is that? That is, the legislature sits and has a regular session, and then they finish and they go home, and the governor has the power to call an extraordinary session and call them back. They really hate when you do this, okay? This is like you're waiting for the last day of school, and you're going to get out of school, and June 22nd is the day, and June 22nd comes, and you're home, and school is over, and it's gone, and then you get a call, and they say, oh, no, no, no. You have to come back for another 4 days. So they came back to extraordinary session, and they were not the most happy bunch, let's say, and that's when Joe Morelli, Grand Mystical Ruler, started calling me the force of nature, which I still believe was a negative context, as in making the legislature come back to extraordinary session. But be that as it may, water off a duck's back, because that's the kind of guy I am. They did come back because there was work to do, and one of the main pieces of work was putting together a package for flood relief for the victims of the Lake Ontario flooding, exactly what we're doing here. And that's why, and it's a smart, comprehensive program. We estimate it will cost about $55 million in total. Again, we're going to go to FEMA for reimbursement, but it will reimburse homeowners up to $50,000 for damage to their homes, small businesses up to 100 employees up to $50,000, farms, municipalities reimbursed for their cost of damages. It will allow local governments to do mitigation efforts. When I talk to the local governments, I say, let's learn from what happened here. Be prepared if the level gets this high again, and now is the time to do mitigation work to make sure it doesn't have the same level of damage. As you heard, it also has reimbursement for damage to Monroe County from past windstorms. The point of the legislation is simple. You have businesses that have been devastated by this. You have businesses that their whole season is the summer and tourism, and this has hurt the number of tourists who are coming to the lake and have wiped them out. You have homeowners who have been wiped out. $50,000 if you don't have flood insurance, and many of these homes don't have flood insurance, and the insurance carrier won't cover it under the existing coverage. $50,000 is just, it's bankruptcy. It wipes you out. Your main asset, which was the home, is gone. So we can't solve the problem that Mother Nature created, but we can make it better, and we can make sure that it's not economically devastating. And my last point is this, and both Joe and Pam touched on it. When you're governor of New York, you get to see a lot of different parts of the state, and you get to see a lot of different aspects to the character of New Yorkers. And one of the things that makes New York so special is the diversity within the state. You know, you have within one state the most rural parts of this country and the most urban parts. You have upstate New York, you have downstate New York. And within upstate, because there really is no upstate, you know, you have Buffalo, you have Rochester, Syracuse, a little different than the North Country, a little different than the Southern Tier, of course. You have Long Island, you have the people from Manhattan, all a little different, and all within one state. And that diversity makes us special. But the one thing that I have noted that I find most admirable is that when any part of the state has a problem, the rest of the state is there like that, no questions asked. You have all this diversity, but when someone is in need, it's one family. And they're there to help one another and do whatever they can. When Long Island had Hurricane Sandy, and I had to go to the legislature and the people across the state and say, you know, these people were wiped out, we have to step up to the plate. Nobody batted an eye, whatever you need. When we had 7 feet of snow in Buffalo, and people couldn't even imagine that, and I went to the legislature and I went to the people of the state and I said they need our help. They drove equipment all across the state in the middle of a snowstorm to go help. It's when things are at their worst, New Yorkers are at their best. And when things are at their worst, then you get to see into somebody's soul, and you get a snapshot of their character, and how are they going to react, and what are they going to do. And New Yorkers uniformly have come together and said, we're one family, whatever they need, we're there for them. And we came back in that extraordinary session, and Senator Helming, a Republican, Assemblyman Morelli, a Democrat, honored the first rule of good government, which is we're not Democrats first, we're not Republicans first, we are New Yorkers first. And playing politics and polarizing people with politics is what's going on in Washington right now, and gridlocking a government which is then stopping progress for a country. That doesn't happen in Albany. And thanks to the character and the conduct of people on both sides of the aisle. So well done to the legislature. I wish we could make it all better. We can't. But we can help you rebuild, we can help you economically, and we can help you with support, friendship, and with love. And that's why we're here, and that's what this legislation does. Let's sign the bill.
Right in there. I don't know.